as a woman because how I'm bending you down and fucking in the ass right now. I don't know. You just seem to be that type. So, look, I think this conversation shows that, look, you're not built for the streets. Charlie Cook would whip your ass. Built to ass, keep in mind. He'll call you a fucking ape and you will lose. Don't get me started with Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes would just drill you. Okay, now that I'm done, see, he does it again. So keep in mind, he does not know how to behave himself. He just insists in muting people.
Is this a stand
Starlink of Doom, hello? But yeah, I don't know. No, seriously, okay, Apollo, I actually want to have like a normal conversation. So, do you actually think that like area theorists like deny or would lose? So I want to be here. So somehow was watching the recording with Luke, with you on area theory. Was it like a synthetic or analytic account of naturalism? Because either or, I think that area theorists can say, yeah, I mean there are particular natural facts, and those aren't questionable within your metaphysics.
The natural facts to be identical to the moral properties. They're not grant natural properties. They can grant like natural properties exist, but not grant the idea that those natural properties are important. And so realistic, the natural properties are the moral properties.
No, I agree that they can have like equivocation. So they'll say like, hey, naturalist, I don't mean when I talk about the sentence, abortion is wrong and use the normative predicate is wrong, I'm referring to natural properties. I agree they will contest that, but but the point here is that say that, the naturalists were to say that and under their meaning, it's something questionable within their metaphysics. They'll say, I mean, we're talking past each other, and maybe here's a better term. They would just say you're talking about morality. I'm talking about morality where I'm referring to non-natural properties, but you're talking about morality where you're referring to natural properties. So I don't really see what the contentions here with being, a naturalist about some particular moral discourse, but being like an area theorist about the non-natural kind.
So I don't think they're going to be talking past each other. I think it's going to be more of a matter of like it is the case that they have the same semantics of what it means for something to be moral and immoral respectively, but they have different metaphysical profile of such. So they're going to believe that like more specifically, like the most moral naturalists are going to be like, well, this is going to be like a claim based on my opinion, not like an empirical claim really, but like based on what I've observed, most moral naturalists are going to be synthetic naturalists. They're not going to be like an analytic naturalist. They're not going to be synthetic by definition that moral properties are natural properties. And so with that being stated in the perspective, they're going to be saying, okay, well, given the definition, what it means for something to be moral/immoral, respectable with respect to certain relevant action-guided principles or facts, I don't believe these things exist. If you believe that natural facts exist, I can agree with this. We can both shake hands on the point that natural properties do in fact exist, but not agree with the bare fact, just simply that there are in fact a set of natural properties which are going to be identical to moral properties synthetically or analytically respectively. So that's going to be the disagreements maybe on that part.
Yeah, I guess so I still don't think that's a disagreement. So okay, I'm hesitant to even call it a disagreement because I think like I think they will say something like, okay, even if how should I describe it? And maybe I think we might be talking past each other even in the debate itself. So whenever I'm understanding area theory to be, I'm understanding it to be, I don't think they should endorse like a semantic thesis as much as like people in the literature think that they should hold to a semantic thesis. I think they can be thought of as like I think I wrote it in my Substack. I'm trying to recall how I wrote it out. I think I wrote it perfectly out. So let's see the section. Oh, there, I found it. So I said, if you're an area theorist and judge that certain normative claims are attempting to predicate properties or describe particular facts that do not exist within your metaphysics, then they're systematically false. And I think that's what the area theorist is doing. So I think that if they were to adopt the concepts that the naturalists are using, I think they still would the spooky magical kind of properties that are attributed to really old ladies that are look very decrepit and maybe has like a under that sense. And that's sort of what I think I hear naturalists are doing. It seems like they're not really disagreeing with the area theorist. In fact, they're agreeing more about their metaphysics than anything, because like they don't allow for non-natural shit in the worldview. So I don't know. I don't really see what the disagreement between it, except for I use different terms in this sort of way, and that's it. It seems just like a semantic dispute rather than just any dispute that will, make air theorists look wrong or express something false about, or sound like a contradiction or some kind. I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't want to like sound too long-winded with it, but
yeah, just saying that like no one is like actually saying something like
Yo, Apollo,
you
yo,
cannot be
Apollo.
an air theorist.
no,
And at the same
no trolling, no
time-
trolling, no trolling.
Apollo.
No trolling, no trolling, trolling. No. We
Apollo.
have it. We have
Shut the fuck up,
no,
nigga.
no.
You know what I'm saying?
That's
I
bad.
was never making the claim that you cannot be an air theorist while simultaneously granting that like natural properties exist. They'd actually agree that natural properties exist, but not in the sense where any of these natural properties are going to be identical to moral properties. That's going to be the whole concept there. So far as metaphysics is concerned, not really any substantive or any sort of disagreement insofar as the analysis or evaluation of moral error theory and the commitments they have, theoretically speaking, in comparison to their disagreements with like a more realist or like a moral subjectivist or like a moral non-cognitivist, for instance. So that's really just it.
Yeah, like let's talk about the thing you were saying. You said that simultaneously granted that like natural property exists. Yeah, they can actually agree that natural properties exist, but not in the sense where these natural properties would be identical to moral properties. Okay, so let's talk about that like identical part. Like at that point, that's where that's where the semantic concepts are are relevant, right? So like if would you be able to grant, right, that natural properties are first and are identical to moral properties, and the moral ones are the things that you'd probably be fine in saying, yeah, I mean, it's the type of properties that are related to maybe context where maybe you want to be a utilitarian or something. So, and utilitarian context, there's this moral properties there that are identical to some natural properties of promoting the overall goodness in the world, right? In this case, sorry, the overall well-being in the world. And typically that's under like maybe facts about pleasure, facts about the minimalization of suffering of some kind, and then you'd be willing to say that yeah, I mean, I'm fine with those being identical.
Usually the moral error theorists, just to barge in, usually the moral error theorists are going to argue that the moral properties cannot be the natural properties because they don't fit the fitness properties conditions. So they're not going to be like fitness properties, right? So they're not motivating, they're not action guiding, they're going to be just something which it's not going to be distinguishable from like facts about psychology, for example, for it to be something which
Oh no, I agree with that.
facts. And so they're going to say that, okay, it's going to have to be something which is non-natural, something which is going to be not a part of the natural world or descriptive of the natural world. It's going to be something normative in that sense. And then they're going to make the argument that, okay, given that specifically, it will be clear, and that's where the jail Mackey's argument comes into consideration as to why
No,
error
I
theory
agree.
being more
So
likely.
I don't want to cut you off. I think so. I think we're hitting the right thing because what I'm gonna say, and I think it's more an issue on your part. Well, not an issue more. It's more like dialectically. Like that's not like if Luke was here, and he would have heard your response, he would have just said something like, "Well, yeah, I agree that naturalists can speak and express moral judgments of some kind." Because keep in mind, they can still be normative, right? So and he just should introduce two classifications of normative. Like he should think that it will be formally normative in the sense that chess norms are normative to some extent, but they wouldn't be the normative in the authoritative sense where realists who are normative realists wants to say that you can't really opt out from the rules.
But I agree with the objection, by the way. Sorry to cut you off again. I agree with the objection that so given like for instance, if we're gonna be saying that like X is okay as I feel good and I feel good when X is happening, that specifically I would agree that like it is not the case that natural facts in that specific sense would be descriptive of moral facts. They cannot be descriptive of moral facts because moral facts by definition are going to be evaluative facts of actions. They evaluate actions. When you say I'm feeling X, I'm feeling pleasure or I'm feeling pain, you're not evaluating any standards for actions. You're basically just giving someone a description of your psychology, which is different from an evaluation of actions. That's just the whole idea right there. So that's going to mean that
Yeah.
just given the definitions or the semantical boundaries of what determines something being a moral factor or a normative factor, an evaluative factor in the context of ethics, it is going to be incompatible with it being a natural fact. However, I believe in the idea. I'm a more naturalist, but I'm a special type of naturalist insofar as I would say that it is going to be it's going to be a natural in some sense. It's going to be a description of instantiations of certain natural properties. So I have like this weird theory insofar as they're going to be first order level descriptions, second order level descriptions, and at the third order level, that's when the moral facts comes in, right? So the first order level would be something like, let's say, like a first order ethical theory with respects to the standards or what determines something being okay. And the second order ethical theory is just going to be any given action or any given proposition about an action which instantiates those properties. And then from the combination of those two level descriptions, you're going to get like the normative force in the third order level automatically. It's not just like one proposition in isolation, which is a natural fact. It's going to be a combination of different levels of descriptions and natural facts, which gives rise to a normative force, which makes the normative proposition existent in the ethical landscape.
Yeah, I guess maybe the disagreement would be then it's like, how do you answer this morality objection? Like, presumably, you know, I mean, if they were if I was an error theorist, to me, I would think that, look, what you're really saying isn't too much, isn't too much strange or too much of a threat to my background beliefs. So that, maybe they are a certain, normative force of the kind that, to me, maybe seems hypothetical, right? So it seems more like, well, it seems maybe practice dependent or maybe emotive dependent of some kind. And, what if we do introduce like a parallel system where, think about the idea of like, say that you're a utilitarian, and I was a disutilitarian, and we look at similar facts,
Okay.
and okay, and we say for whatever reason, yeah, I mean, we look at the facts and we're able to make the same sort of judgments, but not, but we might prescribe different rules, right? So we might say, hey, whenever we see a kid suffering, to you, it might be a reason to alleviate the suffering, but for a disutilitarian, they might say, well, no, I think we should promote a lot of that suffering. And they can mimic and do the same moves that you were able to do when it comes to the rules. The question will be asked: why should we why should we prioritize the moral system as opposed to the moral systems? It seems that maybe you want to say, well, because I really want or really like whatever, right? But those seem to be hypothetical norms, and so the question would be: if both are able to mimic the same way and utilize the same sort of moves, why is it authoritative? Why is it authoritatively normative in the first sense, but not the other sense? It seems that both you can opt out and choose one or the other. So that would be kind of the objection that I would want to levy someone who has somewhat of a view like this, more of a naturalist kind, but yeah, any view particularly that doesn't already sneak in that morality by definition should be authoritative. But yeah, go ahead.
Wait, sorry. So I was like zoning out for a second. Like, I'm gonna be honest. Um, I was zoning out unironically, but I heard you were like saying that like there's like a particular objections, like my version of naturalism or some different version.
No. It basically, I think the morality objection it's towards any view that might be suspicious as just being formally normative, and by formally normative, it's just it tells us there are standards, and relative to the standard, there's correctness or incorrectness of what one should do. Yeah. So yeah, it's only.
I just think like a morality and normative facts just be descriptions of action standards. So like for instance, you have standards for determining, let's say, whether or not some given food or drink tastes good. Like those standards would be like our psychological preferences or taste buds, all of that shit.
Yeah.
Right. But in that case specifically, wouldn't say that that's going to be normative because it's not action guidance. It's not about like how we should act or standards of evaluating actions. However, in the field of ethics, when we're given like descriptions or saying that we should do X, we're basically describing whether or not some given action
You have a
instantiates
reason to do
some
it or
given
something. Yeah.
fitness properties. Yes, of course. And so if it is the case that some action is in conformity with a particular standard of evaluating said action, right, then it would be the case that such action would be something which we should do, or it is okay to do, right? However, if it is not the case that it is in conformity with the standard, then it's not the case that such action would be something which we should do. We should not do this action as a result of it. The lack of conformity with this sort of standard, right? So one example is like goodness. So you can determine goodness based off utilitarianism or something like that. You say, okay, an action is good if and only if it is going to be something which maps onto what most people prefer in society, for instance, or an action is good if it is going to be something which maps onto a certain sense of like virtues, right? Because I'm like a virtue ethicist currently, right? So then you basically just use these particular concepts and then say, okay, well, given that into perspective, then that's where the normative force comes in, because that's going to be the standard for the action itself, which makes it, or which instantiates the fitness properties. Sorry, I'm like kind of tired, to be honest. But yeah, that's the whole gist of the idea right there.
So yeah, I guess maybe let's recount things. So if I'm getting, more specifically what you were saying, like, tell me if not. So you're saying that originally, um, it's not normative because it's not action guiding. There's no action guidance, and it's not about how we should act or standards of evaluating actions. But in the field, like the preferences when we're giving like the descriptions or saying that we should do X, we're basically describing whether or not some given actions instantiates and or given fitness properties. And if we think that if it isn't right, the case that some actions is conformity with a particular standard of evaluation, then it would be the case that the action would be something what we should do. Is that what you're saying roughly? So I don't understand what you so I can at least track what you're saying. Is that what you're saying?
But just repeat the last part, then I'll just agree to disagree with the particular thing you're asking about. Yeah.
Okay. So you said last thing. So the thing was we're basically describing whether or not some given action instantiates a given fitness properties. Then of course, if it isn't the case, if it isn't the case that some actions is conformity with a particular standard of evaluative standards, then it would be the case that such actions would be something that we should do, or it would be okay to do.
Yeah, basically that's the whole idea. Yeah. It's about like evaluative standards and use that as determination for whether or not an action is something which is permissible, impermissible, or something which is obligatory or mandatory from a ethical perspective. Yes.
Okay, so I guess maybe okay. The thing that I'm having issues with is maybe it's not an issue necessarily. Okay, so I guess whenever you have a moral theory, or sorry, say that for whatever reason we were to conjunct with like sort of rules of what you shouldn't do, right? So, hey, you shouldn't at 9 p.m. play with baseballs, and it will be wrong. In fact, we have Moxie reasons to avoid, I don't know, utilizing bats, or I don't know what the fuck the example was of baseballs, at 9 p.m. And it tells us, at least things that we are okay to do within that sort of paradigm. So we are able to do certain actions before 9 p.m. And after 9 p.m. we expect, hey, it is wrong relative to the standard of what Moxie says, that you shouldn't be, kicking or utilizing, I don't know, some bats or something at 9 p.m. And so, okay, there you go. It seems to prescribe actions of what you should do. Now, presumably, you still think that, well, no, that's still not action guiding, because maybe, I don't know, you want to
Yeah, I
say,
agree. It's not
or
action
not, you
guided.
want normative
It's not
force.
action guided insofar as it is going to be the case that this particular standards, which one is utilized in that case, is going to be incorrect application of action-related standards, right? So it doesn't capture the actual relevant standards, which determines whether or not something is in fact ethical or non-ethical, right? So
What?
Basically, just to give like an overall example, is just you have like a particular concept of what it means for something to be ethical or unethical, and then we have the first order ethical theories, which tries to basically cash out what these standards actually are, what the actual standards are with respect to a conceptual scheme or framework, which could be virtue consequentialism or virtue ethicist position, or a utilitarianist position, or a different type of consequentialist position, or deontology, whatever the position actually is, divine command theory, you name it, right? And then after we pick out the correct ethical theory with respects to what is most intuitive, what maps onto our intuitions, what is perhaps empirically adequate, what is more parsimonious or the most parsimonious, then we combine the conceptual framework we have, give it the definition of what it means for something to be ethical or non-ethical, dependent on if it is going to be semantically primitive or not, in conjunct with the correct normative ethical theory, and then from there on you have the correct standard application, and so you can then make a deduction of what is in fact moral or immoral relative to the conceptual framework that you have given your definitional analysis of what it means for something to be moral, alongside the normative ethical theory, which is going to be something which gives us a more specific, detailed analysis of what this conceptual framework would look like when you apply this in the real world to make moral judgments.
Okay. I guess there's a lot to unpack here. So, I think maybe let's try this a bit. So, still want to try to tie in the morality objection and see whether or not we can still do it. So, like, I think that there could be, you can pick out, conceptual frameworks and then see what would count as moral relative to that framework. That's fine. The point here is that it's still vulnerable to the idea here that, well, what I can do the exact same thing. So when I talk about something being moral or schmoral, schmethical, or right, or schmagood, those are picking out some conceptual frameworks about some standards or theories. But isn't that really what morality is? And isn't that just like what morality according to whatever it's telling us? Like, well, yeah, I agree. I think that both standards prescribe different things, and they're able to account for whatever the evaluator wants to account for. So we can stipulate conceptual schemes there, like whether utilitarianism, virtue ethics, or the ontology or whatever you want to say or want out of the theory. But again, these things still seem theory relative. Like, so presumably, look, if I decided, I don't want to evaluate the standards using the conceptual schemes from utilitarianism or virtue ethics or the ontology, let's just do Moxie or disutilitarian evaluations. From there, X is good. Just an action is right if and only if the act is permitting a lot of suffering in the world. Well, at that point, I can opt out and and guide my standards with respect towards that with that view, right? And so then the point would be, look, if we can easily opt out of norms based on our concepts, and we switch those concepts like those, then it seems that morality isn't really authoritative. It just seems that it's analytically true to some extent if we utilize the same concepts, but once we talk about something else, well, it's not really binding. And that's what they should have with universal prescriptivism, right? So same issues that I think your view would apply to universal prescriptivism. It seems that whenever they think what moral judgments are the judgments that have these certain conditions there, in this case that it should be under this idealized version of yourself, and it should be prescribed towards anyone who's in a similar judgment that you're making. And it's something that it's commanding us to do a certain thing. But say that I don't want to make prescriptions like those, such that I'm constrained by the conceptual schemes that the universal prescriptivist wants to place on me whenever I make those type of moral judgments. Say that I want to make moral judgments. In this case, I'm just talking about boo or gay. Look how easy it was to just opt out from norms like those that I should be constraining and looking for the universal consideration of my judgments towards anyone who's in the relevant situation where I am in. And I think that that's no different from what you're trying to do. It seems that it's just concept relative, and if it's concept relative, well, you can just opt out, conceptually speaking, and that's it. It's not authoritative anymore because you're just using different concepts. So
No.
I just
It's
don't
not
see what the
concept
realism
relative.
is.
Like,
The facts going to be determined based off the specific theory. It's not concept relative. We all have the same concept of what it means for something to be moral and immoral. And by concepts, I'm talking about like a base definition. So we agree that like what it means for something to be moral is for it to be permissible or for it to be something which is obligatory. If something is either obligatory or something which is going to be the type of thing which is permissible, then it's going to be something which is moral. Is this going to be something about evaluating actions? Are these going to be referenced in evaluate the facts about the actions? The answer is yes. It's going to be determined based off evaluative facts about the actions. Then we can have different theories about what determines these evaluative facts. The theories could be something with respects to virtue ethics, utilitarianism, etc. But these are going to be theories which are not baked in the definition, the fundamental definition of ethics. It's going to be separate from the actual definition. And we can then say, okay, well, let's compare utilitarianism to, let's say, this other given position, and then let's just see which one is more adequate, or is, we could say, succeeds in unification, for example. Which one is more compatible or explains all the relevant intuitions we have. Okay, we see that in these cases for utilitarianism or adopting a utilitarian position, there's going to be certain commitments. These commitments being, let's say, it's okay, for instance, to rape a dead or have sex with a dead body if no one else knows about it, so long as your pleasure is going to be satisfied. That's something which is incompatible with your intuitions, which we have about not doing this action, or this action being something which is blameworthy or worthy of condemnation. And so we use this sort of argument and then say, okay, that's going to be evidence against utilitarianism. And so that's evidence in favor of, let's say, virtue ethics' position, because virtue ethics would make the prediction that this is not going to be something which is okay because there's not going to be any sort of like respect that's being instantiated by the action. To go back to my position, again, my position is theory neutral. It doesn't presuppose any particular theory or framework. The theory comes in a different conversation, right? So, like one example is Maria sees her friend's wallet. That's going to be these are the combination of the descriptions in my naturalist framework, which basically determines the normative force. So this is going to be the first order level description, right? So it's going to be Maria, for instance, she sees her friend's wallet and she picks up her friend's wallet to return it to her friend, right? Or rather, she sees her friend's wallet, then returns it to her friend later on when she sees her friend, despite the wallet having $5,000 or something like that in it. And then the second order description is going to be um, Maria's action of doing such manifested honesty because she was honest enough to return it instead of being deceptive or dishonest and keeping that wallet and stealing it for herself. That's going to be the second order description. So it basically demonstrates what specific relevant moral property or function or normative function that's being instantiated by the action. Or it doesn't even have to be a normative function, but a moral property or a property which is being instantiated by the action. And now the third level description is going to say that Mario did something which was moral by returning the wallet. And that third level description is going to be determined based off the manifestation of a particular property in virtue of her participating in the action, which makes it the case that such action will be morally permissible or morally obligatory, as we like to put it, right? So that's basically it, right? So we have the action, which is the empirical fact. That's going to be one natural fact. That's not going to be evaluating actions. Then we have the second order description, which is telling us what specifically is being instantiated from that specific natural fact or empirical fact from the first order level description, which in itself is not a normative fact. It's not telling us that we should or should not do this, or this thing is okay or not okay. It's just telling us what is being manifested by her doing this. If it is going to be, did she basically instantiate a sense of honesty or dishonesty or respect or justice or fairness or whatever it actually is, or humility, whatever it actually is, courage. The list goes on. And then the last description is going to be a combination of those two empirical facts, which creates a normative judgment. Okay, this was okay because she did an action which is instantiated by the first empirical fact, which instantiates this property, which we can empirically demonstrate to be true or conceptually demonstrate to be true, even if it is non-empirical. And then that develops this normative force, which is that this thing was okay, or that she ought to have done this thing given these particular circumstances. given the fact that she's a moral, rational agent with these responsibilities and actual commitments as a person.
Yeah, like again, I think that this issue still sort of affects what you're saying. Like, okay, so the point here is that like, um, the point here is that then when we're talking about first, okay, well let's find the definition of ethics and separate it from theories. And you have to pick out what ethical means, and you then compare popular ways of thinking about ethics, so utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and whatever, and by checking which best fits with your intuitions and is more unified, some more parsimonious, then you then apply to the chosen theory to a case and deduce what is blameworthy and what is worthy of condemnation. Okay, now I think you're essentially saying the moral truth is just whatever ethical theory best systemizes your antecedent intuitions, and treating the concept of morality as something that you can stipulate before you choose the theory. And I mean, I think that's what morality objects to. Is objection usually targets, right? So we have a person who stipulates has a stipulated definition of ethical. Then there's a theory chosen by the criteria like parsimony or disintuitiveness or unification, and then the idea that what the actual immoral thing is whatever comes out from the chosen theories, concepts, and so once you do this, I mean I can anyone else can do the same sort of moves, so they can go all that they can talk about their different intuitions. And they can talk about how, look, it seems that they are on the same sort of standing when it comes to maybe parsimony concerns. Maybe we're talking about a different natural property, in this case, the property of suffering in the world. And maybe
Yeah,
you're
they
also
can just
focusing
appeal,
on
but then
the...
they can be fixed by just appealing to the preponderance of intuitions, right? So you can have the intuition that this is okay, necrophilia is okay. I can have the intuition that this is not okay. Cool. So we have a disagreement upon intuitions. Okay, so then let's go out to the world and see which position is more intuitive. My position is more intuitive, so my position is more justified. So my
What?
position in the epistemology,
Then that seems
yeah,
more of
of
like,
course.
hey, how many people can agree with me on this matter? Like,
Yeah, that's good evidence.
so,
Yeah,
and then
that's
you're
great
telling
evidence.
me like,
So,
look,
of
had
course
there
it
been
is.
more necrophilias in the
It's
world
not even agreeing.
where
It's not even agreeing because no,
they
no, it's
came
not
to
even
your
agreeing.
seminar to sign petitions, would that be okay then? Like, would the view that
It's,
it
no,
says okay
it's not
now?
agreeing. It's not agreeing, right? We're talking about this evidence here. So, like, there's a distinction between what we agree with and what is going to be intuitive. So, like, if you look at the illusion experiments, for instance, like the Ebbinghaus illusion experiments or the modernized illusion experiments, or these examples, we have some sort of like prima facie intuitions, and then we reflect upon the intuitions, and then we come to like some new post-deliberative intuitions. We can have intuitions for believing something, and we do not believe in the proposition, or we do not believe in this given analysis. So, it's not just the
Wait,
mere
it
agreement,
has to
but it's
be
what
about
is
my
intuitive.
intuitions or other people's intuitions then, because it seems like then
It
you're
has
sort
to
of
be about
switching it
so
on me.
whichever position is favored by the vast majority of intuitions, in the absence of any other evidential
Why is that the
defeaters, it's going to be
standard?
the
It
position
seems
which is more justified.
well, that seems
Because
more of an issue
intuitions are
independently of...
given the real given neuroscience, given studies in neuroscience, evolutionary biology, clinical psychology, social psychology, mathematics, and intuitive physics, intuitions would be significantly probability raiser for propositions.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
well,
Yeah.
that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, I'm not objecting to intuitions being like used as evidence. The
Evidence.
thing here I'm
Okay.
criticizing here is vast. Like, so it's not just my intuitions. It's now vast people's intuitions on the matter.
Yeah.
But then the question is going to be asked then. Okay, well, I don't want to get too side tangent about this. I mean, regardless of whether it is in fact most people agree. Well, first off, we want to understand what the hell people were even agreeing to. So there's still even various disagreements of
Like
like,
we agree that like necrophilia is not okay. Like it's not okay to like put my
well, I
dick
don't know what
inside a
means
woman's
not
dead
okay.
body.
If I'm okay, well, I think if you were to talk to people, it seems that
We're talking about
sure,
serious
intuitions
properties.
are
Like
maybe intuitions are probably raising, but then I'm just gonna hit you to the studies that we have currently. So it's anti-pluralism on this. So there you go. So right now, I mean, it's not intuitive to people to be, if we're going on this standard, then anti-realism seems pretty unintuitive to most people. In fact, you even have empirical evidence that suggests that people hold to
yeah,
consistently
that's not gonna
anti-realist
work, Moxie.
intuitions. Well, no. Well, keep in
Well,
mind. Well, I thought originally is about taking into account these intuitions people
But
have
my
and
epistemology is not
systematizing
confined
it.
to just intuitions. It's not confined to just intuitions. In this case, now when we're having disagreements upon what action is okay or not okay, given what we know of currently, intuitions is the strongest piece of evidence. Maybe in the future, of course, like in some utopian society, we can have some sort of
Yeah, I
technological
agree,
equipment
and these are
which
intuitions people
serve
have
as
in the
stronger
matter.
evidence than intuitions. Okay, yeah, but the arguments are the study you're appealing to is irrelevant. Like when you're talking about like which
Wait, I
position is
thought it
true,
was
like
relevant. I
metaphysics.
thought the debate was about look. We can have we can talk about like a anti
Okay.
version of what your morals are, and then from
Mm-hmm.
there, we look through. Well, look.
You mentioned
And
anti-realism,
intuitions are
Moxie.
probably reason, and
Yeah,
everywhere,
yeah, that's
right?
metaphysics. You
It
mentioned
seems, and then
metaphysical
when
profile
you
of
talk about sort of what people ask about the matter, about how they think, even the amount of like conceptual work that we're doing gets outweighed by the empirical facts about
Well,
sociology
Moxley,
we
you
have on
mentioned
the matter about how
anti-realism.
people use
Well, yeah,
terms.
what you mentioned a while ago
So
was
if
anti-realism. I'm
people
saying that like
usually think
we never
concepts
talked
like
about.
good and bad
Mhm.
are referred to as things regarding kind of their first order beliefs about the matter, and those first order beliefs are just going to be talking about their sort of underlying attitudes in the matter. And secondly, maybe they hold to some form of relativism as another explanation, right? It seems that when you look at kind of like the figures here, realism is pretty at the bottom. And if we think that evidence,
That's
intuitions are
now
going to be
just
the
switch
best
the
evidence,
conversational
well
scope,
then
right? You're
shouldn't this
switching
be
the
undermining your
conversational
view
scope.
in any insignificant way? Especially in the conversation where I was talking about Schmoral objections, where the Schmorality objection is targeting only like like imagine doing the same sort of moves that you're able to do, but in this case a twist. We're not actually referring to the things that are
Moxie, I'm not
authoritatively
making the
normative,
claim that
but maybe
intuitions are
normative in some
determined.
kind.
Moxie, I'm not making the claim that intuitions determines the moral facts. Right? It's not going to be evidence against realism. We're not going to put realism below relativism or any of that stuff. This is just as expected under realism as it would be under any other metaphysical position or any other position which is going to be assessing the moral facts or the nature of the moral facts. For example, in science, of course, we're going to be looking towards what services or what is going to be justified given the current evidence or given the preponderance of evidence. If we grant, which we do in fact grant, that intuition is evidence or any intuition in particular acts in isolation in the absence of the feeders is going to be evidence for a proposition, then of course it's going to be the case that if you have a position which is favored by the vast majority of intuitions in comparison to another position, absent of any defeaters, that position is more justified. That position is favored by the preponderance of evidence. Again, that's not incompatible or is going to be evidence against realism. And we're not talking about realism anyways. The scope of the conversation is
No,
not
we
about
were talking
metaethics
about
or anything.
realism.
No,
That's the whole point of the conversation. The
we're
whole
talking
part of
about
the conversation was,
utilitarianism.
hey,
No. We're
well,
talking about
if we're
normative
talking
evidence.
about
Normative
your
evidence.
version of naturalism as being any issues with air theory, well, yeah, we are talking
No, I'm
about
talking
whether
about the
more
point.
realism is true
I'm
or
talking about the
not,
point you're
and
on.
we're talking about look. Do we think that naturalism, or the sort of way that you're characterizing naturalism, best fits with with either our common folk understanding of terms?
I'm actually not
That's
realistic what I'm
that's
saying. I'm
partly
saying that
what
the
metaethics
point
is
you're
about.
on, the
Sometimes we're
point we've
partly
been talking
understanding
about.
what people mean by terms like this. And if
Yeah,
we
the
think that,
point
hey,
you're talking about,
we
Moxie.
want
It was about
explanatory
realism.
power for a theory, right? They should obviously account for how people think about concepts and how they think about ethical concepts. And if the ethical concept seems to be different from what you're proposing, well, what's the issue? The issue here is that maybe this meta ethical account isn't really doing anything. It's only just maybe doing armchair philosophy. But when we're
Moxie. I
talking
mean,
about what people
we've
mean
already shook hands on this.
as
We've
an
already
empirical
agreed on this,
claim, well, yeah,
right?
I
So,
think that you should definitely
all
account
right,
for what people
realistic.
mean by this. So I don't want to
Okay.
cut you off.
So, Moxie,
I just wanted to like
yeah,
finish on this
I'm
point
explaining right
only
now.
that
I'm
like
explaining right now. We've already
it's in
agreed on
fact
this.
that
We've
no,
already
it's not
agreed on
really
the idea
intuitive to
that.
believe in realism, and no, it's not intuitive to believe in the concept that you're talking about when you talk about this first, second, and third order ways of going about it. And
Okay,
that
so
should be
what you're not
raising to you,
understanding.
if you think evidence is high, probability raising. And if we think
Okay.
there's counter stacking evidence against what you're saying, well, yeah, I think you should understand and take into consideration and not think, well, yeah, I mean, let me just hand
Yeah,
wave it
so
off
you're
or
not
something.
understanding a couple of things right here. So the first thing I'm talking about here is simply that. But I'm saying we're not talking about metaethics. I'm specifically talking about the point you're on in the conversation. The point you're on specifically with respects to the conceptual analysis of what it means for something to be ethical or non-ethical. That's not about metaethics, right? Same as in when you mentioned utilitarianism and those objections or those specific examples, we were not talking about metaethics. Yes, the original point of the conversation stemmed from me telling you what my metaphysical position is, but that does not mean that the conversation itself and the things that we're talking about in the conversation was about metaethics. That's number one. Number two is simply as it relates to what you're talking about here about the intuition stuff, of course, we have good evidence which outweighs those intuitions which you're talking about, which you think is evidence against realism. And again, we're not talking about realism versus anti-realism. I'm not trying to give evidence for realism. I'm not trying to give evidence for why this is going to be the case. I'm giving you a sort of explanation as to how my naturalist system would function, despite to be a naturalist position, irrespective of the usual objection, like for example, naturalism or natural facts being incompatible with these sort of like action guided principles. That's what I'm saying here. Now, I'm not saying the intuitions determines the moral facts, or that they're the types of things which defines what the moral facts actually are. All I'm telling you here is simply that there's no conceptual disagreement. That means that from my perspective or from any other person's perspective, we have basically, for the main part, the same definition what it means for something to be moral and immoral, respectively. Yes, we can have different theories of this particular concept, but having different theories of a particular concept is not the same as having the different concept itself. You can have identical concepts and have different theories about that concept, and those theories are going to be some sort of like synthetic judgment about the concept itself. And so, of course, you can have variations of synthetic judgments depending on the opacity of the concept, right? So like something like morality, for example, or something like consciousness, these concepts are very complex. And when you talk about complex concepts here, it's going to be more likely that there's going to be a diversity of judgments about these types of concepts, right? So that's not pointing out to us having different concepts. It's pointing out to us having different theories, which we think determines the facts about the concepts, which are going to be synthetic facts. Different things, Moxie.
Yeah,
That's
I think I wrote
basically it.
out. Yeah, I already wrote out what I think the where we're having this conversation. So originally talked about it was about you and Luke about naturalism and air theory on you know either probing questions about whether or not there's being conflictions with them. Could it be the case that you can be an air theorist and still think you're a naturalist, and there being a contradiction in that, or there be issues with potentially outside of the semantic dispute, is there anything here that is interesting for projects of meta ethics to sort of investigate? And the second thing is naturalism normative at all, right? So part of that is that we want to give two senses of what normative means, and maybe more normative in the first sense about rules, right? But that's not interesting to meta ethics. So the thing that's interesting is it authoritatively normative? And so that's where morality objections were relevant in there. We then went off in talking about whether folks agree or not with the analysis that you're providing and its content. And I think that if the idea here is that you want to capture how what's the theoretically best theory, right? Well, I think that part of the best theory is that it should have explanatory power there, and I think you would agree with me on this. So I want to, at least tell you that, hey, I think that if we already have empirical evidence on how people think about concepts, well, that should be at least it should be at least weighty, right? And that should pose issues when people want to give an analysis of what people about how concepts work and how most people understand the concepts to be, and if the theory seems to be divergent of that this massively, right? Well, then that should poke holes and say, well, nope, seems that you're on the wrong track. Because we think that metaethics is about understanding the folk, and getting clear what they mean and what their positions are, and what are their metaethical assumptions based on those observations are. And it seems like it doesn't seem to be naturalism. In fact, it seems to be anti-realism. So, yeah, I mean that's sort of what I want to say in the last matter. But I don't know. Seems like we've been here for.
I was never
An hour.
discussing the evidential analysis for like the naturalism versus like non-naturalism, or like realism versus anti-realism, or any of that stuff. All we're just talking about there is how you can have like a naturalist position, which is going to be compatible with like these sort of authoritative fitness properties. Not to mention, I was going to also mention that with respects to what you're talking about there, I'm not sure what the specific details of those studies actually are and how it's going to be evidence against the position. But again, we both agree that, like, with respects to what it means for something to be moral, ethical, unethical, or immoral, respectively, it's going to be something which relates to fitness properties. Again, the sort of disagreements we have about like the normative ethics stuff is not going to be a conceptual disagreement or a disagreement about the fundamental facts about the concept. It's going to be a disagreement upon some non-fundamental facts about that same concept, i.e., perhaps synthetic facts. Well, it's going to be synthetic facts. It's not going to be disagreements in the sense where
there are going to be like some analytic factual disagreements upon the concept, and that's going to be different, right? So that's the whole idea I'm trying to push forth here. I'm saying to you here that when you're having disagreements about like what is going to be okay in the sense of necrophilia and that stuff, that's still going to be something which stems from different concepts in the sense of different definitions, what it means for something to be moral and immoral. It's going to stem from different perspectives of the facts, which determines the conditions for what is moral and immoral. And those facts are not going to be something which we can derive from definitions, but those facts could be something which are separate. They're conceptually isolated from the definition itself, and you can attach those to the definition depending on if those facts are going to be justified given the current empirical evidence or intuitions or theoretical virtues you believe is going to be probability raising in the relevant epistemological sense. That's really just the whole idea right there. Yeah, I'm sleepy.
Last
Really,
thing I'll
truly.
say is I well it's I already commented it, so people can just look at the side chat, but whatever. That's it.
You said what, sorry?
Well, I don't want to say it out loud, but like, I mean, it was gesturing at the earlier point we were giving for making a comment that seems to be an empirical question, and me providing at least presumably a sufficient response to the empirical question being asked, that we both agree on this. And it seems like, well, no, it seems that if it's about fitness properties, and we see that tracking with folk intuitions, but not really. We don't see that. But maybe
So
keep in
you don't
mind,
believe that to be the case? Okay, so what folk intuitions do you think is incompatible with the fitness property stuff?
not
Like
well.
what?
Let's be clear. It's not the incompatible. Like that's the thing that we're not even saying. I'm saying whether people understand and mean when they make up moral utterances, or whenever they're saying stealing is wrong, are they actually referring to these sort of what do you call it, fitness properties? And it seems like no. It seems that they're just talking about some high order property about their attitudes, right? And that's something that's not tracking fitness properties, that's tracking stances. So I mean, that should be at least a reason why you
Well,
shouldn't
this is not. Well, I don't see why this is true. Like for example, when someone says it is wrong to rape kids, what they're really saying there is that they're criticizing the action. They're saying this is an action worthy of like morally condemning. It's worthy of moral condemnation. They're gonna agree that such action is not meritorious. That's going to be a fitness property. So when I say we should not do, when they're saying this thing is wrong, what I'm saying is we should not do X. Those are identical. And if I'm saying we should not do X, we're saying it is not going to be something which is fitting for me given my moral agency. So it's not suitable for me to do X, or it is not something which is worthy of being enacted given what is okay and what is not okay. That's going to be fitness properties. They're inextricably linked. You cannot deny the link. That's going to be like a fundamental axiom, basically.
I
And so that doesn't
again
disagree with my point.
I
That goes to a different topic. Like what you're talking about there is their intuitions which could favor anti-realism, not intuitions which denies the sort of like fundamental conceptual
well,
facts
no,
about
that's the
the
point. The point here
semantics
is
of
about whether
morality.
people understand what terms mean, and you then mentioned about it referring to the sort of fitness properties of how this relates to your agency, or it's fitting to your given moral agency. And I'm saying, well, no, that's not what people like. If you can skim through it. Maybe it's pretty bad. Maybe we
Uh-huh.
should take time to read it. But I thought you were gonna have a discussion with Lance Bush, so maybe he can remind you again about the same paper. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me that like whenever we look through it, it doesn't seem to suggest they're referring to fitness of maybe like in a Brazilian sense of fitness, or of sorry, fitness, virtue ethics of fitness. No, yeah, I think I was right. It was Aristotelians because Footlip was an Aristotelian. She talked. Well, whatever, it doesn't matter. That's something else. The point here is that it doesn't seem to suggest that people are intending to mean that. Now, it could be compatible, like in a sense that there doesn't entail a contradiction at all with believing these type of beliefs about hey, maybe someone in some weird country might believe fitness whenever they talk about concepts like those. But the point here is, hey, what do most people mean by this? And that should be the response that meta ethics is supposed to account for. And
Oh,
it
I'm
seems
saying,
that
given the
accounts for
definition of
anti-realism.
ethics, or what it means for something to be moral and immoral, by definition, it necessarily entails they're talking about fitness properties. Because when you're saying fitness properties, I'm just talking about descriptive features of the world, which makes normative evaluations apt, right? So, like
But whose
something about the
concepts are
action, which you can
this?
then something. Hold on, something about the action, which you can then use to say that this action is something which you should do or should not do. That's all fitness properties are, and so necessarily speaking, it's going to be the case that when someone is making a moral judgment, like this thing is okay, there would be a fitness property because they're indexing that to a particular property which they believe is instantiated by the action, which makes it okay. So that's not something which is controversial at all. It's going to be something which is pretty obvious.
You keep saying the word obvious, or that this is what people use or think, or these are fundamental conceptual facts. But
I'm not
whose
saying they
concepts and
consciously
semantics
think about
are?
this.
Is it yours? Because if that's yours, I mean, yeah, no one disagrees that that's how you're using it. But when I look through it, it seems that they're just talking about their stances, not about how it fits to their agency at all. But hey, how they think and feel. What they think and feel is that whenever you say stealing is wrong, it means yeah, it's either in accordance with my preferences, it's not in accordance with my preferences, it's something that I would have approvals of in a given, relative standard of a given culture I'm in. I would appraise it or don't appraise it, but never about whether or not, hey, whenever someone says stealing is wrong, they mean it's something that's not in accordance with my, with the fitness of their. Well, motherfucker, there's something there. Oh, sorry, I can't speak. Sorry. Mother effort. It's not really clear to me that they're saying that, and I mean, again, I don't want to go lose and lose. So that's like the last thing I have the matter, and I don't
Yeah,
know. We can
you're like
chill and
actually
relax
getting
or
my
something.
position, by the way, because I think you're just like having like a different analysis of what it means for something to be fitness property. I'm not saying specifically that the agents or people in like normal conversations like they're consciously thinking about this. I'm saying there's a subconscious judgment that they are making when they're making these moral judgments, and that subconscious judgment necessarily bakes in fitness properties. That's all I'm saying there. So even if they don't have this baked in their definition, that's irrelevant, right?
Oh, um, Jesus, that shouldn't be that loud. Also, you can try to turn the there's like a limiter in OBS where you can turn it down to I think the nice sound people usually go with is probably -4 decibels. But you can always turn it back to like maybe 10 or something to make it sure that it isn't too red. Um, yeah, because sometimes you don't want it to yeah, you don't want it to blast people's ears out because some people like to watch videos in high volumes, so you want to avoid that. But um,
Uh, And
just for
also,
the people's sakes.
let me just check this real quickly. Hold up. Consistently anti-realist. I'm not too sure about this study because then we have situations in which if you ask the average person, okay, well, let's say most people, including you, were to have like different preferences about raping the kid, would it now be an okay action? Pretty sure the average person would say no.
Well, that's
It's
a
not
straw
going to be
man. I
okay.
think even Lance talks about this. Like they'll say something like, "No, no, no. What standard are you evaluating? Is it wrong?" It still retains. It goes back. So it's like saying. So how should I describe it? It's like you're still reassessing my standards. So if hypothetically me, I didn't believe that. Do I think it's wrong? Well, yeah, it's wrong relative to what I believe. So think
Yeah,
about it in
but I
this
don't
sense. It's
think
like you're
the
talking
average person
about
would not. The average person would not say this wrong relative to what they believe. The average person would say that irrespective of what they believe, it is just not okay to rape kids.
why do
It's
we
not
think
based on what
that?
I'm
It doesn't
saying.
see like the article doesn't say that.
Do you
Like
okay?
in fact,
Do you
so
think okay? So if you go up to the average person and ask them, okay, is it an opinion? Like if you ask them, is it an opinion, just like a
well, I
mere
don't want to
opinion
ask people
that
because
raping kids is
presumably
okay?
you can. I want to be
Yeah,
clear. You
I'm
can.
just giving like an
The issue
example
with
right now.
that is that
Let me
even
just
in the study it
hold on.
goes
Let me just
over.
finish.
Okay,
Let
okay,
me
okay.
finish. I was gonna say, if you go up to the average person and say, is it an opinion that raping kids is okay, or is the fact? Sorry, is it an opinion that raping kids is not okay, or is it the fact that raping kids is not okay? 9 times out of 10, they're gonna say the latter is true. It's gonna be a fact, not just a mere opinion. That's going to be something which is not expected under the anti-realist position. Not to mention, you could talk about the philosophers' intuitions being more credible than these people's intuitions. Philosophers, actually, the vast majority of philosophers are going to be more realist, right? You could argue that this is going to be derived from prima facie intuitions or post-deliberative intuitions, but whatever the means are right there, if going to be appealing to intuitions or just these sort of like collective judgments, that's going to be altered by philosophical intuitions, given the fact that those are going to be intuitions are going to be more likely because there's more deliberation that's been involved in those sort of like intuitions, which plays a huge crucial role in the conclusive development, or sorry, the conclusion of the position they have insofar as that is concerned, right?
Yeah, like again, I think this is an obvious thing that again you then have to talk to Lance Bush on this, where he's gonna say the exact same thing. So he's gonna say, for one, well, I think asking people, random people on the street, questions isn't like a really good way of reliably be accurate to what people think. Again, there's a lot of studies here that isn't done globally and is only isolated to what the U.S. thinks. Maybe for whatever reason, maybe in the UK or somewhere else, maybe more maybe people are really more receptive to believing in moral realism or something. But already, so it has bad diversity diversity and representation of what the average people
Diversity
believe.
comes from the concept being an opaque
And
concept, not a matter of like
two,
realism.
I don't want to. Come on, you spoke a lot. I gotta like say something. And two, we think that okay, so out of that way, like diversity and sample sizes, being concerned here is look, I think that whenever people are asked this question, there is this worry that you might sort of lead them to that conclusion, right? You sort of for one, I think that obviously for anything related to philosophy, these are technical terms that you probably need to study and you have at least some sort of extent of knowledge of it. So when people are sort of bringing concepts like that, I mean, I don't think people would understand what you're saying, and they'll just probably nod along and saying, yeah, I mean, whatever. I don't know what this guy's saying, but maybe sure, maybe I don't know. And we don't want that. We want to be clear what they actually believe in. And so there's this partial move of saying, well, look, maybe you can explain briefly a little bit of what we're asking here and kind of break them down. But then that's just you sort of teaching them a bit of philosophy, which that's sort of the point for why we want normal people. We want non-philosophically trained people, and their intuitions in the matter. So we can't really do anything with that. And I think asking random people would just make it even worse. So it's surprised even in the article that it goes over where they talk about that how difficult it is to explain people concepts like those that isn't already sneaking into your views or sneaking in already assumptions that analytic philosophers or analytic more philosophers already are more prone to believing. The fourth thing here is that okay, say for whatever reason they understand somewhat. Yeah, I mean, what if I think there's this sort of tendency to ask questions that might make you look socially bad, right? So there's this dogma of saying it's always bad, and if it seems they're slightly even like thinking that if you're leaning support, you get corrected. So any risk of that, people will shut it down, right? And they'll recorrect and put on a facade, right? And put up a front, right? So maybe that could be explanation. Who knows? And the last thing here is that okay, well, we're obviously doing a normative entanglement here, where they might be confused with the question. So it might be the case that yeah, I mean, I do have a moral belief that it's wrong, even irrespective of whether hypothetically I should have like no belief at all in the matter. Though, we're talking about in the meta-ethical question. Maybe yeah, I don't think that there is properties or facts like those that are respective of what I mean. It seems that we might be talking past each other, etc., and they might say, "Look, I don't think that's true," and that's it. And it's seemingly, getting this sort of 9 out of 10 sort of, 10 of people. I don't know who you're getting from the 9 out of 10. Yeah, again, it's just no different from what philosophers do all the time. They just want to assume their intuitions of the matter and act like most people agree with them. The reality here is that no one really agrees with a lot of people's intuitions on a lot of things. You only get that a lot when it comes to maybe ordinary cases that are not contentious. That's why we don't, appeal to, intuitions and the making sense of when it comes to psychology, no psychology, physics, right? Because we don't think it's generally the thing that would be of a good standard to base off what people think. But metaethics seems to be maybe like a sociological question, and certainly here the people here that they're best in getting an answer for that. So I applaud them for doing so, and I probably wouldn't trust. I would want to trust them more than what you're saying as like not 9 out of 10, but people agreeing with this because I don't know how you're coming up with it. But there's at least something at least reliable here that I can just point to you. But that's it. I mean, we can end the conversation there.
Yeah, good
I'm
compromise.
gonna end it.
If you wanna have a debate tomorrow anytime, I mean, okay.
Really good, you know. But yeah, good conversation. Have a good night, man.
Okay, I think I can end it. I don't know if there's any recording. Okay, well, I'm ending it. Bloody combo.